Hey, everybody. Welcome to a bonus episode of Two Legs, a Paul McCartney podcast. I am Tom Hunyadi. You may know me from my other show, Talk More Talk, a solo Beatles video cast. And as you see, I'm solo here. My co host, Andy, is still just slightly under the weather, but he will be back this weekend for an all new show. But I am not solo for this show. As you can see, we've got a returning guest here, and we're talking to Glenn Greenberg, who last year was here with us talking about Paul McCartney at 80, celebrating 80 years of Paul McCartney, this wonderful bookazine that he did. And he's back this year to talk about his brand new bookazine, the trivia book of the Beatles. Glenn, it is really exciting to have you back. We had a great time great chat with you the first time, and it's good to have you back. Welcome back. How you doing?
All right. Well, thank you for having me back. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah, so this is the trivia book of the Beatles, and let's just let's just talk about trivia in general. It's just every time I hear trivia or quiz, I start to kind of get a little little antsy, and it just I like trivia. I like trivia when I have time to answer it. I don't like trivia when it's just like you got 5 seconds. Like
Yeah.
watch we'll watch my wife and I will watch Jeopardy, and then every
Right.
once in a while I'll be able to get a trivia in there real quick. How are you with trivia? What do you like about trivia?
I like when I know the answers.
Exactly, right?
um,
Yeah.
they're my memory is really great for stuff that I'm really interested in.
Right.
If I'm not interested, I can hear it. I can hear it
Hmm.
multiple times, and it goes in one ear and right out the other.
Right.
And I mean, I've been writing bookazines or MAGA books or whatever you want to
Hmm.
call them about the Beatles for about uh, 3 years now, going on
Okay.
3 years, and been soaking up so much information about their lives, the ins and the outs, the details, and I find that almost none of it, if I didn't already know it, almost
Right.
none of it stayed in my memory.
Thank you.
So
Yes.
yeah,
I agree with you 100%. I could be so immersed in something
yeah,
reading it, like this new McCartney legacy book, where I have,
which I have it. Yeah.
I've got, a little bit memorized in my head. I mean,
Hmm.
especially the more important things. But there comes a time where is it too much information? I mean, can those people that can remember dates and
Right.
where they were when Kennedy was assassinated? I mean, those things like that. It just boggles my mind how they can do that. I'm just so bad at retaining information.
Hmm.
You
And
know.
I'm also, it depends on the type of information. Like if it's
Right.
really dramatic stuff,
Right.
um, like I actually I have the McCartney Legacy book as well, and I haven't
Mhm.
read it in the traditional terms, but
Right.
I flipped through it. I've
Mhm.
skimmed just to see what's awaiting me, and there were some sections that I read, and I was like, wow, this is really juicy stuff, and
Right.
I remember that stuff,
Right.
but
Right.
I couldn't. I just I don't retain dates and
Right.
figures and stuff like that. If I know I'm going into a trivia type of situation, I would have to do like the Ralph Cramden thing and start like cramming for like a week. Every
Right.
single and
Uh,
end up answering Ed Norton anyway. But I hope that's not
what's
too obscure a reference.
right? Well, no, there's some honeymooner people out there. I
Okay,
know
good.
Ken Michaels is a huge honeymooners,
Okay, good.
big honeymooners guy. But yeah, just in trivia in general. I mean, there's the Beatles Trivia Pursuit. Do you have that, and have you played it at all?
Let's see. If I played Beatles Trivial Pursuit, excuse me. I know I played Star Wars Trivial Pursuit.
Okay, right,
I don't think I've played Beatles Trivial
right,
Pursuit. I
right.
don't think I even knew it existed.
Yeah, yeah. There's a Beatles Trivia Pursuit out there. It's there's come to be known that some of the questions aren't 100% accurate. So there you go, right? So,
That's funny.
but what did you? But with the book is in the trivia book of the Beatles. You have it laid out with group and then some solo stuff and then solo in general.
Yeah.
Is that how you wanted to lay it out? I mean, because you're also trying to tell a story as well, correct?
To a certain extent, that wasn't the main priority. Telling a story. The main priority originally was we had kind of the plan was originally to kind of set it up like Jeopardy, where
Okay.
the questions get progressively harder
Harder.
as you
Right.
go along.
Mhm.
For the most part, I think that kind of fell by the wayside. And the order in which I asked the questions, I felt as I was writing, they had to make a certain degree of sense.
Mhm.
So in that regard, I guess yes, they tell a story, but that was not a top priority of ours.
Right.
Was to tell a story, just sort of like, if I'm referring to, you know uh, John's Aunt Mimi in one question, I think she has to be set up in a
Right.
previous question, kind of
Right.
thing. If
Okay.
I'm if I'm, if I'm
Okay.
going to be, getting specific about that. So that's like one example. But one of the things we didn't want to do, we didn't want to make it a quiz.
Mm.
Um, with multiple choice answers and very
Right.
sort of brief, multiple choice questions with very brief answers. And the format was great, was because we could ask questions and then provide context and background information. Then we could get into the details, the facts
Right.
and the figures that I
Right.
don't know off the top of my head,
Right.
and get into that kind of stuff. So the telling of the story was kind of like a happy byproduct from the
Mm.
way the thing was created. But in
Gotcha.
terms of how it was set up, and it's 9 chapters with 9
Right.
questions. Um, I think that I think my editor Bob Durr and I kind of came up with that together,
Mhm.
which was, once we figured out what the format was going to be, 9 chapters. Well, you could do the 4 eras of the Beatles. There's, the early
Right.
years, Beatlemania, the studio years, and the breakup years.
Right.
That's 4. And then one chapter about each Beatle.
Mhm.
That's another 4. And then the solo years. So it all kind of fell into place that way. Like, boom, 9.
Right.
We're ready to go. And that's really how it came together. It was, some things just kind of fall into place.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, trivia in general especially with Beatle fans. Every once in a while we get together and we like to, throw out a trivia question because
Mhm.
we think we know it all or whatever, or we find an interesting one. Which you do have some very interesting ones
Great.
in this book. So, in your mind, when you get this assignment, it's a green lit, it's a go. Talk about the trivia questions that you want to present in here. Without really giving any away that are in the book, which ones were to you specifically were the most important to get in this book?
The well, it's a two-pronged question, because there are some that I felt had to be in there because they're expected.
Mm,
They need to be in there, and you have to keep in mind that not everybody reading this is going to be a Beatles expert. So you have to
right,
get some of the basics in. And what's going to be but simple for you or
right,
for me, is not going to be easy for someone like, say, my wife, who
right,
likes the Beatles. I mean, she's
right.
got some of the albums, but doesn't have encyclopedic knowledge. Or my daughter, who
Mm,
is obviously the new generation, hopefully, of Beatles fans. And again, she has some favorite songs that she has of the Beatles, but doesn't know the history all that
right.
much. So there's stuff that has to be in there for them, and those are the
Mm,
ones that I felt. But for me personally, the ones that I got the chuckle out of, there's like, oh, I hope they let me put this in there. Is stuff like, stuff about songs that nobody but the diehards really know about.
mhm, mhm.
It's like the kind of thing, like when you're at a Beatles concert, or
Right,
excuse me, at a Paul McCartney concert, and he starts playing a song that the people next to you have no idea what it is, and you're sitting there crying because you're so thrilled that he's singing it. You
right.
know,
Yeah.
so stuff like that.
Mhm.
That's the stuff that really made me happy. There's a song that Paul wrote for, another group. This was in the 1980s,
Mhm.
and it is so
Oh yeah.
obscure. It's so obscure
Yeah, I know
that
where you're
I
going. Yeah.
I didn't know about it until like maybe 10 years ago. I mean, I
Right.
think I knew about it when it first came out, but
Mm,
that was 40 years ago almost.
right.
And so I kind of rediscovered, oh yeah, that one. Well, only a few years ago, I found Paul's original demo for it,
Mm,
and I fell in love with it.
right.
And so again, it's a song that I would say 90% of the population doesn't know about, never heard, certainly have never heard the Paul McCartney demo of it.
Right.
And I was like, let's see if I can if I can squeeze this one in there.
And it's such a great story because
Yeah.
he's fast at work on his movie project, right? He's just
Yes.
immersed in projects,
Yeah.
recording music, doing a movie. Here comes Dave Edmonds, who's also in the movie.
Right.
He's working on this other project who we'll get to. But he said, "Hey, you got a song?" He's like, "Well, and obviously who it's for is really important to him because
Yes.
as we know in Paul's history, he talks very highly, and both their names are in a particular song, you know,
That's right. That's right.
So yeah, so this means a lot to him. Oh, and
Yeah.
he goes, "Give me a week,"
Give me
and
a
then
week.
there you go. Here's this beautiful song. Reminds me of the in the McCartney legacy where Paul's he's in the Carly Simon um, session, and Richard Perry is the producer, and then Richard Perry's like, well, if I give you, can you come up with? I'm working on Ringo's next album. If I, can you give me a song? And he goes, well, if you give me a deadline, I'll
Hmm.
I'll, I'll get you something, okay? And he goes, and it's a Sunday. I think it's a Saturday or a Sunday. And he goes, okay, how about Wednesday? And then so Wednesday he comes back with 6 o'clock.
Right.
It's just this stuff is mind blowing. You can't make this
Yeah.
stuff up. It's great.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I'm glad you had that in this book because it is a marvelous song that people should know.
Yeah, and again, I prefer Paul's rough demo than the
Hmm.
finished, polished version that
Right.
that came out. And it's one of those songs that I really wish that he had done a version of it, like a
Right.
proper
Yeah.
version of it. Maybe it's one of the ones that he could have duetted with Elvis Costello on. You know,
Yes. Yes.
um,
Absolutely.
which brings me to another thing that I really wish that he and Costello had put out. Tommy's Coming Home
Yeah.
proper.
Yeah.
But that's a whole other conversation.
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
don't think there's any trivia questions about Tommy's Coming Home in there. But
That's
but
fine.
uh,
That's fine.
but yeah, I was happy to get that in there. There's quite a few
Hmm.
where the way that my editor and I worked it out is because it's 9 questions for each chapter.
Right.
What I did was I sent him about 12 or 13 questions per chapter.
Oh,
This way
okay.
we had more
Right.
than we needed
Right.
because let's say I sent him 9 questions for each chapter and he
Right.
only liked 5. Then I
Right.
have to go back to the drawing board and come up
Right.
with 4 or 5 more questions.
Right.
This way, he has more than he needs, and he could just choose the 9 that he liked the most.
Right.
And that really worked out. And in one particular case, I sent him again like 12 or 13, and there was one that I figured he would dismiss out of hand. And no, that's the one he went with. So I was like,
Okay.
oh, cool, cool. I get to
Yeah.
I get to write about this. So yeah.
Any that you were disappointed that didn't make the book, or was there a particular one where you thought was, or were you happy with what was in the book?
Oh, I'm happy. Oh, I'm
Right.
definitely happy. I mean, if I
Right.
wasn't happy, I would have pushed back a little bit and would have said,
Okay.
"Oh, come on, let's get this one." But I think one that I thought would have made it in and didn't, and I'm not griping about it. I was just like, I'm happy with what got in. Was I think what was George Harrison's first
Solo record.
ace? Oh no, what was his
Oh.
first A side
Oh, it's A side.
as a
Okay.
Beatle? As a
Right.
Beatle,
Hmm.
it's again for people in the know, it's easy.
Hmm.
But some people might think it's, oh, while my guitar gently weeps,
Right.
Here Comes the Sun, or so which it was neither.
Hmm.
But so I figured that one was like such an obvious one that would have made it in. Maybe it didn't make it in because it was so obvious. I don't know. I mean,
Right.
I'd have to ask my editor, but I didn't ask at the time because I was like, that's fine. I'm happy with the ones he approved.
Right. And then you have ones in here that kind of like fall through the cracks. Like you knew, but you maybe, you forgot. You know,
Hmm.
like it's easy to forget the I think the Clapton Harrison co-write for the Cream
Right.
album. I think it's easy to forget that one.
Hmm.
because there's just so much history,
Right.
between the two,
Right.
So I mean, it's kind of good that you're also bringing in questions that people might know, but they may have forgotten in the past, and this is
Sure.
just it's just you just rehashing it out, and people, oh yeah, that's right, they did do a song together, and a very good song,
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely. Oh
yeah,
yeah, I love it.
yeah,
And a lot of it also is because, as I was mentioning before, a lot of the stuff that I retained in my memory,
hmm,
coming from, becoming a Beatles fan in 1977, and from then on, especially after John died,
hmm,
um, where I really just did a deep dive and soaked up every possible thing I could read about the Beatles,
right,
starting with the Philip Norman book Shout, and
hmm,
then going to the Nicholas Schaffner book, The Beatles Forever,
right,
and then becoming old enough where I'm reading like every issue of Rolling Stone, especially the ones where there's a Beatle on the cover, an ex Beatle on the cover.
hmm,
Uh, Getting back issues of Rolling Stone or Crawdaddy or Life magazine that the Beatles were in, reading all of that stuff, soaking up every interview, and just following their solo
right,
careers, um, and retaining a lot of this stuff. So when I was sitting down thinking about the questions, I was like, well, what's the stuff that I remember from 30, 35, 40 years ago
right,
that nobody talks about anymore?
right, hmm,
And so as long as I could like go through my archives and find photographic or journalistic proof that I'm not making this stuff up in my head, where I could actually point to and say, okay, here's when this happened, here are quotes from it, here are dates and figures and all of that, then it was fair game. And so a lot of that stuff did make it in.
right,
Stuff about Saturday, the Beatles connections to Saturday
you're
Night
not
Live,
right,
or uh, just like stuff like
right,
particular comments or incidents that happened, or stuff
right.
that they talked about in interviews.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Cool. I'll ask throughout this show. I'm going to ask 5 questions for the audience,
Okay.
the listeners. In the comment section, you guys can leave the answers. If you can watch and then answer at the end, or you can answer as we go along. However you want to do it, that's fine. But first question or the first trivia question that's in the book that I'm going to ask is, why did Decca Records reject the Beatles? So again, you can wait until after this is over and then just answer all 5 at once, or you can answer right now. But if that's the case, again, the question is, why did Decca Records reject the Beatles? Now, one, I love that you brought this up. Kind of controversial because it deals with drugs, right? Okay, and there's a very famous interview with Paul that you can watch on YouTube, and we're talking about you know uh, who was the first Beatle to publicly discuss his use of LSD, and I just love this particular interview because Paul's in his backyard or whatever. He's sitting on the on little seat, and the guy's asking the questions, and Paul's going, "No, it's you who has the responsibility. I'm perfectly fine telling you the truth, but I prefer that this doesn't go out." I just die every time I hear this. Perfect. So really cool that you added this because listen, we all want to think that the Beatles were innocent, right? They didn't do anything wrong. But the fact of the matter is they did sex, drugs, and rock and roll just like every other band out there, and you have to. It's part of the story,
Absolutely. I mean, at this point, I think it would be incredibly naive to keep feeding that myth that
right?
that they were, that they were the innocent little mop top, kids
Right,
that yeah, from a hard day's night, and that they weren't taking drugs and screwing everything, that they could get their hands on well
right.
before. I mean, they were pretty upfront about the fact that they were not innocent in Hamburg, for
No,
sure.
exactly. Right. And you've got a,
It's
a question in there about that one as well.
mhm.
So it's a very well thorough look into the history of the Beatles and solos. So I like it for that as well. Let's see here. Moving on. You've got diehards will definitely get probably most 99% of these. There's a couple if you're mid range. Beatle fan, maybe you don't know whether it's true or false that Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was meant as a tribute to LSD. Who knows, right?
Well, I can guarantee you that my daughter
Right.
probably would have assumed that it was.
Hmm.
You know, again, I'm trying to appeal to a wide swath
Hmm.
of readers, or Beatles fans.
Right.
So it's I'm trying to make it so that there's a little bit for everybody, with people who are, you know, new to the Beatles, or casual, or, you know, they used to be and they're getting back in. Maybe they forgot a lot of the details and stuff. And I know that the diehards are going to be the hardest ones to satisfy,
Right.
because
Oh,
they
always.
they
Yeah.
always are. Whether
Right.
it's whether it's the Beatles, or Star Trek,
Right.
or comic books, or whatever, the diehards are very hard to please, and you have to go into it knowing that they are going to come after you with their knives
Right.
sharpened, and you
Right.
just have to have thick skin, or you stay off the internet.
Right. Very true, my friend. Very true. All right, question 2 for everybody out there listening and or watching. Name the only song on Sergeant Pepper that George Martin did not arrange. Okay, very good question. This is a very good question. And again, this is something that a lot of people may not know. So that is number 2. In your mind, what do you think a Stanley Kubrick directed Lord of the Rings starring the Beatles may have looked like?
Oh my God. Well, I think that, well, I mean, I think it probably would have been as coherent as the David Lynch version, with much cruder special effects.
Okay.
Uh, uh, I think that I'm not the hugest Stanley Kubrick fan.
Oh, okay.
I think there's a real coldness and lack of humanity in
Mm-hmm.
his movies, which is why probably, my favorite Stanley Kubrick film is 2001, which
Mm,
is where all of that is really sort of called for.
okay.
Um, but all of the other movies that I've seen by Kubrick, that there's been a real distance from the human element. Like The
Mm,
Shining, I think, is a very cold, inhuman film.
mm-hmm.
I think that Doctor Strangelove, it works for that movie because it's a spoof, it's a
Right.
parody,
Satire. Yeah.
it's a satire.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, I think that the Peter Jackson versions, which, obviously we all know and love, there is such a warmth and such a humanity, and it's so touching, the relationships between those characters. It's hard for me to picture, Stanley
Right.
Kubrick capturing that,
Right.
because he always, most of the movies that I've seen from him, he seems like he's one step removed
Right.
from humans. He's like an
Right.
observer, not one of us, kind of thing.
Right.
And so I
Yeah.
think that a Stanley Kubrick version of Lord of the Rings with the Beatles, um, I mean, it's a great question. It really
Yeah.
is it's a really great question. I think that it would have left a lot of people confounded.
Right. One aspect of it, I think he would have thrived in Stanley Kubrick. That is because he does have like there's 3 movies that feature a lot of landscape. Okay, in Lord of the Rings, I mean, you're dealing
Sure,
with a travel film. There's a lot of landscape. Okay, you look at
sure.
something like Paths of Glory. Okay, a
Mhm.
lot of landscape during war. Okay, and then you see something like Barry Lyndon. Again, a great cinematography. A lot of outside action. Then you look at Full Metal Jacket. Again, a lot of landscape. So for that kind of stuff, I can see, but as a whole, as a film, he probably wouldn't have made it anyways. So
Right.
there's really no, this probably wouldn't have happened. I mean, it didn't obviously,
Well,
but
he didn't
I
want
don't.
it. I mean,
No,
yeah, I
right,
mean,
right,
yeah, I mean, he was approached, and he wasn't interested.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
So, but the thought is pretty fascinating,
oh, for
and
sure.
so. But good question. So the question is, what fantasy novel did the Beatles want to adapt into a movie? Okay.
Right.
So there's that. Okay. Now, another interesting one is that, I mean, there was a couple things about the Sergeant Pepper cover, right? And I found this interesting was I gotta move this here so I can read the whole thing. Who demanded payment to be included on the cover of Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band?
Yeah.
Now, again, there's some aspects of the Beatles I could care less about. I don't need to know. I mean, this was like one of those questions where I mean, it really didn't interest me. But then after thinking about it, it's kind of fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
So Leo Grocery, is that how you pronounce his
Gorsey.
name? Gorsey, So he wanted reportedly wanted $500 composition or compensation to appear on. Now that I'm honest with you, I never would have got that,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm a huge fan of the Beatles, but again, that's like those questions. It's a question there that's very interesting, and maybe not even diehards might not know.
And where I was coming from was, it's like I want people to not know
Hmm.
the answer. Number one. Number two, when they read the answer, I want the reaction to be
Right.
who the hell is this guy, and where does he come off expecting payment? He should be
Right.
happy that he's even getting the expo. That's the reaction that I'm hoping to get. Is
Mm,
you would think it would be like, well, Marlon Brando, of course, or uh, you
yeah.
know, I'm trying now. I'm challenging myself to think about, all right, who was on that cover? I'm looking at the cover in my head right
Right.
now.
Right.
I'm seeing Marlon Brando
And you also
and
talk about
who
Mae
else?
West a little bit too, right?
Hmm.
She didn't want anything to do, and it's funny because then ironically enough, she ended up working with the Beatle,
Right,
right?
right, right.
you know,
But yeah, I figured the right reaction, or the reaction I was going for, was
mm,
why did he think they were going to pay him, or
right,
what kind of leverage did he have at that point?
right, right,
So yeah, that's really what the reaction I was hoping for.
right. Um, okay, the White Album version or the John George Harrison version? Not guilty. Which one do you prefer?
Wow, that's an excellent question, because the two versions are so different.
Yes.
Um, with completely different approaches. So it's kind
Right.
of like asking, well, which do you prefer, the White Album version of Revolution or the
Right.
single version
Single
of
version.
Revolution? It's two
Yeah.
completely different. I think that the well, I think that the Beatles version of Not
Mhm.
Guilty has a little bit more
Edge
of
to
an
it.
edge to it.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. It's not it's not one of my favorite songs,
Hmm.
no matter what. Um, but I think that the edge works better for the song, because what that song is about,
Yeah.
and by doing it as sort of like this mellow kind of jazz pop thing, the the message is kind of blunted, which
Right.
may be what George was going for at that point.
Mm,
But I think that the edge kind of helps the
right.
subject matter.
Yeah. So the question is, what George Harrison song was cut from the White Album? That's not part of the five, but that's just what we were talking about. So let's get to number three here. What do we want to do here? Okay, you have a question here. This might be a tough one here. So you put a definitive answer to this question. Okay,
Okay.
all right, because there could be many answers to this question, and this will be number the five. So we won't talk about. Well, we won't give the answer, but we'll talk about it. But when did the Beatles break up? Now you give a specific date, which I am not arguing with, because that is the day that a particular person says, I want out, right?
Mhm.
So, and not only is he a particular person, but he is the person that started the band. Would
Mhm.
you agree? So I guess that date, coming back from Toronto, coming back from
See,
performing,
you're giving too
but go
much
ahead.
away.
I know. But it's also a date that people might have to look up as well,
Right.
because it won't be, in their minds. But
Mhm.
let's talk about that for a second. I mean, in your mind, I mean, that is the day you feel that, even though they were, finishing up an album or whatever,
Mhm.
and that's the day right there. That's the date.
Well, I mean, I think that this is open for debate,
Hmm.
and I have seen it argued when,
Right. Right.
when was the point of no return?
Right.
Um, Arguably, the point of no return is a little more than a year later
Hmm.
than the date that I gave. That's the point of
Okay.
no return.
Hmm.
But when you factor everything in terms of
Right.
what was going on, the circumstances on the ground,
Right.
looking at it in hindsight, which of course is 2020,
Right.
the date that I give, I feel is
Right.
that
That
date.
because when a particular person released that little questionnaire to go and coincide with his new album, people would consider that to be the day.
Right, right. But even that
So
wasn't. Even that
no, right,
necessarily wasn't. Yeah.
right, because he didn't really necessarily say that it's over.
Right.
But unless you read that Life magazine article where he
Right.
says that this Beetle thing is blown up,
The
and
Beatles
but
thing.
that's
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but that's a different thing. So again, the question for you guys, question number 3, when did the Beatles break up? And it's a specific date. So give me 1 second while I write this down. Okay, so moving on. Again, a lot of just fun, and a lot of them are fun too, just to go back and look, because not only do you give the answer, but okay, so like this one right here, we'll go, who assembled Let It Be before Phil Spector was brought in? Okay, well, if you got the Let It Be box set, even if you didn't, maybe you might know that Glenn Johns was the main producer on this film, and he was also the one that presented a first cut, right, of Let It Be. So not only do you just give the answer, but you also give, the story behind that, which I think is a good touch, like we talked about earlier in the show.
That's the thing that I love is that
Right.
is that each question is answered with a mini essay
Right.
that gives you a fuller
Hmm.
explanation than a simple
Right.
yes or no or one word answer, true or false or whatever would give you. You do
Hmm.
get the history, and in
Right.
that regard,
Hmm.
I think it's a great format.
Right. There's an interesting one that you have in here, and it's what Beatles song got John Lennon sued? Okay, now a lot of people know this answer, and it's not part of the 5, so we'll just talk about this. So the answers come together. Okay, now the thing that I've wanted to explore and research, I just haven't gotten to it yet. Okay, the credits on that song is Lennon and McCartney. Why wasn't
Mm-hmm.
Do we know why McCartney wasn't included in that lawsuit? Was he ever included? Did he get out of it? I've always found that kind of fascinating. Okay, so yeah, maybe Lennon wrote it, but McCartney's name is on there as well.
That's a really, really good question.
You know.
I suspect that the lawyers got together and
Mm-hmm.
made it abundantly clear that that Lennon wrote that song.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would have to think so because, like you said, McCartney wasn't really touched by it, and yet his name is on the song. That's an excellent
Correct.
question.
Mm-hmm.
As most things are as is the answer for most things. Probably the lawyers got involved.
Mm. Yeah, that,
you
that
know,
could be. Yeah, that could be.
and
All right.
I will tell you that because you said that a lot of people would probably know the answer to this.
Mm.
Well, one time we were driving. I was driving with my wife and daughter,
Right.
and we were playing the song that John was sued over.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter had no context whatsoever, and she goes, "Oh, that sounds like Come Together." And I turned to her and I said, "Boy, do I have a story for you." And so that's what's so great about this is that
Mm-hmm.
my daughter made that connection, and
Mm-hmm.
so I was able to explain all this to her. And here it is.
Right.
It's all in here.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Um,
There you go.
I love that.
Mm-hmm. Very good. All right. Question number 4 for the folks out there listening, and I wanted to include this because she had just celebrated her 90th birthday, and I'm a fan of hers, and so I know a
Okay.
bunch of people out there are. What song had John Lennon been working on with Yoko Ono on the night he died?
Yeah.
So, and I know that's I would say that's maybe your most commercial song.
Mhm.
I would say, like, if you're interested in Yoko Ono, I would say that this particular song would be a good jumping on point if you're interested in her music. So at this point, so now we're into the solo stuff. I just asked one of the questions from the solo chapters here. Um, as we're comic fans, you got to work in the comic industry,
Yeah, I did.
and maybe we can touch on that a little bit after we talk about the book here. Um, what three comic book villains, super villains, figured prominently in a song by Paul McCartney post Beatles band Wings, and it's one of my favorites in his catalog. Whether you want to call it the McCartney catalog or the Wings catalog or whatever, but Magneto and Titanium Man, and you can't forget the Crimson Dynamo, right? Because that's the
Right.
third. That's the you kind of be like two. What are you talking about? Two? No, there's actually three. It's just his name's not in the title.
Right.
you know,
Exactly.
so one is Magneto, who's the X-Men. You got Crimson Dynamo, and you got Titanium Man. They were Iron Man villains.
Yep.
Were you? Did you what talked about a little bit about your comic history? Were you a Marvel guy, a DC guy? Were you a little bit of both? What do you think?
Ultimately, I was both, but I started out with DC because the first comic book character that I got into was Batman, and that was courtesy of the Adam West TV series, which was on
Hmm.
every day after school. And then my older brother was a comic book reader, and he went off to college,
Mm.
and he left his comics, obviously left them behind, and I found them, and
Oh,
I found a Batman comic, and I was like, oh my gosh, he's in comic books too.
right.
So that started me on the path, and then not too long after that, I discovered the Incredible Hulk, and then the
Mm.
Hulk had a TV series.
Right.
So those are my two first favorites. So for DC it was Batman, and then for Marvel it was the Hulk. And then
Hmm.
eventually, as I got older, I started expanding my horizons a little bit. I got into Spider-Man, and I was a huge Star Wars comic book fan. Marvel was putting out Star Wars comics. I was reading those. And then I got a little older, and then they restarted Superman from scratch,
Right.
and I loved the Superman movies, but I felt that the comic books didn't really reflect it. So
Mm.
once they started making the comic books reflect the movies more, I started buying Superman and
Mm.
the Teen Titans and all that stuff. So
See,
I love both.
yeah. See, you just hit on two of my favorite artists in their comics was John Byrne and George Perez.
Oh
My
yeah,
oh my, and George unfortunately just passed last year,
yep,
and the big loss in comics because I was collecting his Justice League of America from I think the late '70s, early '80s,
yep, yep,
and big fan of his. And then he did a wonderful job on Wonder Woman
yep.
and Crisis on Infinite Earths,
Hmm.
just Teen Titans, like you said, just an amazing, amazing artist.
I got to work with him
Oh,
numerous times, and
oh,
he was
really?
he was a wonderful guy,
Yeah.
and just brilliant. I mean, his work was gorgeous, and
Yes.
he, up until the end, I mean, he really retained the quality of
Hmm.
work. He just was, yeah, really wonderful guy. I
Right.
worked with Byrne too, once or twice,
Yeah.
on a very limited basis. But yeah, I mean, it was a thrill for me to grow up reading this stuff and
Hmm.
and getting to work with these people, just a few years later.
Right.
It was great.
Oh
Yeah.
man, so jealous. He did a wonderful job. Was we know She-Hulk, Alpha Flight. You got the like you said the Superman stuff. I mean, I
Fantastic
just
Four.
yeah, Fantastic Four.
Hmm.
I just
Hmm.
devoured all that stuff because he was a writer as well, right? I mean, he wrote a
Yeah,
lot of this stuff. Yeah.
he sees him. I mean, he started out as an strictly an artist,
Right.
but when he got to Marvel, but
Hmm.
he always saw himself, Byrne,
Hmm.
as an artist, as a writer who draws rather than an artist who
Or just that
writes.
writes. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Excuse me. When did you first hear and see of this little TV show called The Ruddles? All you need is cash.
It would have been the mid 80s.
Okay.
I was too young when it first aired. I guess it was 1978 was when it
Hmm.
first aired. So I
Mm.
was a little too young at that point to have seen it. I probably was sent to bed before it aired, before it
Yeah,
went on the
right.
air.
Exactly.
But what happened was, in the mid '80s, my parents finally broke down and got cable for
Mm,
for their summer home upstate,
okay.
and so I believe it was HBO or one of the premium cable channels that, and we had it, started showing it.
Mm.
It came back into circulation, and that's how I discovered it. And I thought it was hilarious. My mother actually bought me the album.
Oh, okay.
There was the soundtrack
Yes,
album,
right. Mhm.
and so that's when I first discovered it. Was I It probably would have been 1984 or 85 when I first
Mm,
saw All You Need Is Cash.
okay. I remember my uncle. This was probably would have been at some point in the '90s. He had like a floppy disk version of it where you can throw in your computer.
Oh,
And
okay.
yeah, never seen anything like that in my life. So watched it that way on the computer. So
Okay.
and it was just I was just I mean, I was amazed. I was just like, "What am I watching? This is awesome!" And then to actually see a Beatle in there, George, you know,
Oh my god. I
just
mean, and
yeah,
and he's great. I mean, that's the
yes,
funny thing
yes,
is he's just so
right,
deadpan and
right.
just so perfect. I heard that all of them really enjoyed it except Paul.
Paul, yeah, because the way Eric Idle presented, you know,
I
or
mean,
impersonated, or or however you want to,
come
describe it.
on. What they did to Yoko? I mean,
Yeah.
come on. If anybody should have been offended, I mean, she's
Right,
in a Nazi uniform, for crying out loud.
right,
I mean,
yeah.
it's like I don't recall Paul being portrayed, or
Hmm.
Dirk McQuickly coming off so poorly that
Right.
that Paul really had a reason
Hmm.
to be offended. But apparently um, he was not a fan.
Right. Oh boy. Have you read the book The Beetle Who Vanished?
No.
Okay. So this is because you have a question in here. It's like, who replaced Ringo Starr
Oh,
temporary during the Beatles
yeah.
'64
Okay.
World
I
Tour?
I wasn't aware of the title, but I'm aware of the
Yes.
book. Yes.
Yes. Amazing,
Hmm.
amazing. This book is absolutely amazing. Just brought him to our attention. I never knew. Well, I mean, because of my listen, I was born in '73. Okay, I
Hmm.
really didn't start wanting. I didn't really start reading about the Beatles until the '90s. I cared
Oh.
about the music.
Hmm.
I didn't care about bios or anything like that. So
Hmm.
as I've been reading about it, Jimmy Nicol, what a story!
Hmm.
Fascinating story. I mean, he's a great drummer in his own right. Here he is. He's out on tour. He's thinking to himself, "Hey, I'm better than Ringo. Maybe I'll get asked to. Ringo's always sick, right?
Yeah.
This might be my opportunity. This might be my big break. You know. So, but this is a great story. Well, it's a sad story, really, the Jimmy Nicol story.
Yeah. He kind
So,
of he kind of you know it kind of went downhill just
right.
very quickly career wise. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's a great story, and I didn't get it. I didn't get a chance to put it in the book, but
Mm-hmm.
you were talking about somebody who wanted to replace Ringo.
Right.
Uh, he wasn't the only one. Apparently, uh, the Beatles were in a club, or at least John and Paul, maybe George, were in a
Mm,
club socializing, and Keith Moon sat down
mm,
and said, "I want to join you."
mm-hmm.
And they were like, "Well, okay, well, you're sitting with us here. Yeah,
Right.
okay, join us."
Yeah.
And he goes, "No. I want to join you." he was he was he was ready to ditch the Who because he wanted to join the Beatles.
That's
It's
hilarious.
it's anecdotal, but
Right.
I'd love it if it was true.
Right. Here's one that I learned over the last couple of years myself, and this will be question 5
Mhm.
for the folks listening and or watching. With what band did Ringo Starr finally get to play drums on back in the USSR? So
That's probably my favorite question that I got in there.
really,
Yeah.
okay,
Yep.
okay.
Yep. That's
So
you asked me before which
for
one
right,
which one was that? I
yeah.
think it might be that one.
Okay, very cool, very cool. More solo stuff. I like this one a lot. This is really cool. I'm glad you got this in here because a lot of people might not know this. Now, throughout the 70s, all four of them were asked, when are the Beatles getting back together? When are the Beatles getting back together? Well, somebody, when they signed a contract with Columbia, thought, well, maybe it might happen. So I'm going to put this clause in my contract saying, giving me permission to record with them if that happens, and I'm still going to have a contract with Columbia as well. And the question is, what former Beatle was optimistic enough about the band reuniting that he made it a clause in his recording contract. This is a really cool story. With Paul McCartney signing this contract with Columbia and then putting a clause in there stating if Beatles get back together, I'll still record for Columbia, but then I can also record on another label.
What it suggests to me is that he either had absolutely brilliant lawyers who tried to account
the Eastmans,
for every. I don't know if it was the Eastmans at that point. I mean, I guess we can assume it was, but the lawyers who and the thought that it's like Conan O'Brien should have had those lawyers because they didn't put in his contract when he took over the Tonight Show. You cannot move the time slot to away from the 11:35 slot because it wasn't in his contract. NBC was able to do that, and somebody, I think it might have been Jay Leno or it might have been David Letterman, said, "Oh, that wasn't in your contract? Well, that's your lawyer's fault." The fact that they were able to account for this possibility, that either means that they were brilliant or it means that a Beatles reunion was closer to happening than anybody than they ever let on or that any of us knew. Because why would that even be a topic of conversation? Again, either brilliant lawyers or there was something in the ether that they were looking at. And look, maybe it might well have been the Long and Winding Road documentary that ultimately became the Beatles anthology. Maybe that was it. Maybe they were thinking that, well, we'll record a few new songs for this thing, and so that would qualify as a new Beatles project. Maybe that was it. But I don't think we're ever going to find out at this point. So many years have passed, and so many people involved are gone. But it's definitely a source of great speculation.
Well, this is definitely one of those questions where you would want the interviewer to know in the back of his mind, and if he ever had the opportunity to interview Paul, this would be one of those questions like, how close were you guys to reuniting to want you to have that added into your contract?
That's the key part. That's the key part of the question. The question is because he's been asked that question a million times. How close were you guys? You think, and he has his stock answer, which was we could never get all four of us at the same time when we were willing. But then you follow it up with, but you had it in your contract. Then he has to answer more directly, And so, I wish that I could be in that position to ask him, But he's 80 years old now.
He's 80 years old, but you would think something like that may still be lingering in the back of his brain. I don't know.
If I got the opportunity, I would certainly hope so.
Oh, please, somebody out there, So, but again, the bookazine is the trivia book of the Beatles. Glenn, this was a great opportunity to talk to you again, and really enjoyed this one. So check it out. It's in It's bookstores everywhere, right? Newsstands,
newsstands, and you can order it directly from the publisher. Has its own online shop.
Okay.
Magazineshop.us.
Okay.
And you can just type in Beatles trivia in the search function, and it'll take you right to it.
Amazon, yes or no?
As far as I've seen, it's not on Amazon yet.
Okay.
But you can definitely order it for the same price that you would buy it from Amazon from magazineshop.us.
Okay, because I think that's how I got This guy was on
Probably, yeah.
Amazon. Yeah.
Hmm.
So, anything are you working on? I mean, you don't have to tell, but are you working on something now?
I've got a couple of things. I've got another bookazine, non-Beatles related,
Okay.
coming out probably in the next 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
This is more comic book related. I had done
Okay.
for Time magazine, like the McCartney book that you just showed. I
Right.
did a similar book for Spider-Man for
Mm,
Time,
okay.
and this is along those lines. It's for another iconic superhero character.
Okay.
And so that'll be out in the next few months. And then later this year, in fact, I'm putting the finishing touches on it right now. I'm still writing it.
Mm.
Is another Beatles related
Oh, very
book.
cool.
And this
Okay.
is going to be more focused on a particular project that they did rather than
Oh, very cool.
rather
Okay.
than their lives or the biographical kind of thing. This is more
Right.
about a specific project.
Okay, cool. So you being a big comic fan, DC, what are your thoughts on this upcoming this new DCU with James Gunn, who had a lot of success with Marvel with the first two Guardians of the Galaxy films. The third one's coming soon this year. Do you have any hopes, or I mean,
I
what are your
have
thoughts on?
hopes.
Yeah.
I think no matter what, it's going to be interesting because anything James Gunn does is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I may not always like the stuff that he does. I may not always, think that faithful to the source material, but it's always interesting.
Right.
If he's as much as of the comic book fan as he claims to be, and now that he's going over to DC, he's going to be working on, because with the Marvel stuff, he was working on characters that were kind of obscure.
Yeah.
So he had more freedom to do whatever
Right.
he wanted to put his own kind of spin on it. At DC, he's going to be overseeing the whole thing, and he's
Mm-hmm.
going to be putting a personal stamp on the biggest guns. I mean, no pun intended. Um, he's writing the next Superman movie.
Right.
So it's going to be interesting to see if he's going to be able to put his money where his mouth is. Like, well, he's always claimed to be a big comic book fan.
Right.
Let's see what he does with Superman.
Now's his chance. Right. I
Now's
mean,
his chance. And if you get Superman wrong,
right.
then the whole thing collapses.
Right.
And so I'm curious. I'm very, very
Mhm,
curious. So far, he's been saying a lot of the right things. Um,
mhm,
um, one of my biggest concerns is with Batman. It
mhm.
looks like he's going to be basing his Batman on an era of the comics
Right,
that
right,
drove me away from Batman. So,
right.
but
And
but
the
I
fact that
yeah.
as we're talking about, his son, it's the Brave
Mm,
and the Bold.
yeah,
They're using the Brave and the Bold tagline
yeah.
on this one, and the fact that he's like 10 years old, right, in the comics. Do you think they're going to transition that into the movie as a 10-year-old, or do you think they make him older? Because it seems just so. Here's this 10-year-old. I mean, he's a little bastard.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think he's probably going to be older than 10.
Hmm.
Only because I'm just thinking back of all the times that they make a movie and they put like a kid, like a really young kid,
Right.
who's like a little bastard, and
Right.
how well those movies tend to do.
Right.
And the first movie that comes to mind is RoboCop 2, where
Okay.
they had like this 12-year-old kid who was like
Mm-hmm.
the drug kingpin
Mm-hmm.
of Detroit, and one of the biggest knocks against that movie was that kid. The kid was fine. I mean, he was hired to play a little bastard, and he
Right.
played a little bastard, but the audience hated him.
Right.
So I don't know. I think when I don't think that's what people are expecting to see or really wanting to see in a Batman movie. A little kid who
Right.
is mouthing off to Batman. I
Right.
think that if you make him older, you make him like maybe like
Uh,
14, 15, it's a
Right.
little bit more acceptable.
It's a little more acceptable, right? And as people don't know, the kid is Robin in the comics. I don't think I mentioned that, but
And he's
yeah,
Batman's son. He's
he's
literally,
Batman's son.
yeah, it's
Yes.
not
Yeah.
Dick Grayson, it's
Right.
not
Right.
Jason
Jason Todd.
Todd, it's
Yeah.
not
Right.
Tim Drake. See, that would have been the one that I'd be interested in seeing
Tim
if
Drake.
they No,
No,
Jason,
Jason
do the
Todd,
Jason
right?
Todd story
Yeah,
where
right.
Batman basically takes in another Robin,
Hmm.
and you either kill him or keep him around, but have a this ongoing conflict between Batman and Robin,
Right.
which has never really been done in live action.
Hmm.
Um, I just think that Batman having a literal son um, ages him to a point where it's sort of
Right.
like, it's now he's like your dad figure. He's not your big brother. And I think that these comic book characters
Right.
work better when you look at them as a big brother, not as your dad.
Mhm.
Your
Right.
dad's an authority figure. Who
Yeah.
wants to read about an authority figure? You want to read about your big brother and follow him on his adventures. That was what was cool about Batman.
Hmm. Hmm.
You know.
Yeah, another one I'm really interested to see how they handle this is it's called Lanterns, and it's a
Mm.
Green Lantern based show with Hal Jordan and John Stewart.
And John Stewart, which I
Yeah.
think that's great. That's a
Yes.
great.
Yeah.
The concept is great. I don't know
Yeah.
how the execution is going to be,
Right.
but the
Right.
concept is great, and that's one. That's going to be, I think, a TV
See,
series.
that'll be on HBO Max as a TV series. Yes.
Great, looking forward to it.
Hmm.
That sounds like a great idea. Creature Commandos
Yeah.
is so,
Animated one. Right.
and that, oh, is that animated?
Yeah, it's gonna be
Oh,
animated. Yeah.
okay, okay. I would
Yeah.
check that out.
Hmm.
And I know
And the,
that this doesn't come under James Gunn, but I have to admit that Flash trailer looks
yes.
pretty damn great.
Yeah, I mean, just seeing Michael Keaton as Batman again was really interesting, and who
Interesting, yeah.
knows, they could do some magic into where they find a way to incorporate Christopher Reeve's Superman in there. How cool would that be, just to see, like, an image of him in that? I don't know. I'm not saying it's going to happen,
Right,
but
right,
you
right.
got Michael Keaton in there, you got Ben Affleck in
Yeah,
there, reprising his Batman role as well.
right.
So
Or at the very least, Bruce Wayne. I don't know if he suits
Bruce,
up, but
yeah, okay, good
at the
point.
very
Yeah.
least, we'll see him as Bruce Wayne.
Bruce Wayne, yeah,
Yeah, I think that the direction that this Flash movie was going to set up, I don't think I
right.
would have liked that direction ongoing.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
excuse me. I think the plan was they were going to replace Superman with Supergirl, and that's in
Right.
the trailer, so
Hmm.
I'm not giving anything away. And I think
Right.
that going forward, I wouldn't have liked that. But as a one-off, as long as we get a Superman back that
Right.
is in the classic mold, as a figure that inspires hope
Right.
and optimism, and
Right.
makes us want to aspire to be as good as him, and somebody who cares about humanity and sets an example as a role model, that's the Superman I want to see. If James Gunn gives
Right.
us that,
Well,
I'll be happy.
I can see how, the post credit scene could be setting up. You see
Oh,
an image, you see the boots coming down, you see the legs, you see I mean, and they reveal the brand new Superman.
right.
Um, I guess I just learned that within the next 6 months they're going to be announcing cast members, so that kind of fits in there. I
For
mean, what's
Superman?
that? Yeah, yeah,
Oh, okay. I
they're
hadn't
gonna
heard that.
start announcing people who are cast in these films here soon. So,
I
uh,
would imagine so.
yeah,
I would hope so.
I would hope so too.
Yeah. I mean, I liked Henry Cavill.
Yeah,
I thought that he was done wrong. I thought he was a great Superman in some really bad Superman movies. I think that he got a chance to show a glimmer of
hmm,
what he could do in the original version of Justice League,
right.
where he was wearing a brighter
Hmm.
Superman uniform, and he was laughing, and he was showing the charm that I think that Henry Cavill naturally has. I did check out the Zack Snyder
Snyder.
version, the
Yeah,
4 hour
yeah,
slog,
yeah.
and sure enough, he's just dead serious and
Right.
scowling, and just there was none of that. That's one of the few things that I think that the Joss Whedon version of Justice
Mhm.
League had over, is that they got Superman pretty much right. That's the Superman. That's the Henry Cavill Superman that I've been waiting to see. And
Gotcha.
of course, we'll never see him again. That's just the way these things go.
Right. That's unfortunate. But
Mhm.
Glenn, can anybody reach you or contact you on social media, or you just don't want to be contacted? Just leave me alone.
Well, I'm
Uh,
on Twitter for the time being. I don't know.
okay.
I don't know, but the way Twitter's going, I don't. I
Yeah.
don't know how long I'm going to be on there. But I'm at Glenn L. Greenberg at Glenn L. Greenberg on Twitter, and
Okay.
it's two N's in Glenn. Well, if you see my
Yeah.
name, it's
Right there.
it's at Glenn L. Greenberg. There's an L obviously in the middle, between Glenn and Greenberg. That's probably
Okay.
the safest way to find me.
Okay.
But yeah, that's
Great.
it.
Okay. Well, for Two Legs, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Two Legs Podcast. You can email us at twolegspodcast@gmail.com. Please check out our YouTube channel, Two Legs, a Paul McCartney podcast, where you're probably watching right now. And if you haven't, please subscribe. We're really we're starting to, get close to that 2K that we're our goal of 2K by the end of the year. And as I said before, we'll probably have a little giveaway for once we hit that 2K subscribers. So again, thank you to all the new people checking us out. We really appreciate it. All the ones that have been watching since day one. I love you. Thanks for sticking around and taking this journey with us, Glenn. It's been a pleasure having you back, and we'll have you back again
I hope so.
if this with this new project coming out hopefully later this year.
Yep.
And good talking to you,
Same
everybody out
here.
there. It's great seeing you all, and as always, have a great day and a beautiful night. Take care, everyone.